The first symptom was mild, so mild that no one paid attention. A slight discomfort in the stomach, an ache in the head, a passing wave of dizziness. Nothing that couldn't be blamed on a restless night or a bad meal. But then it happened again. And again. The pattern was slow, methodical. The victims never saw it coming. By the time the real pain began, it was already too late. Their bodies betrayed them. Cramps that seized like a vice. Sweat pouring from their skin as if they were burning from the inside. Their hands shook. Their vision blurred. And then, the final stage. Organs shutting down, one by one, until there was nothing left but silence. For months, no one could explain it. Doctors puzzled over the mysterious sickness, grasping at answers that never quite fit. The victims weren't connected by lifestyle, age, or health conditions. Yet, they all suffered the same slow, agonizing fate. They didn't know they were being watched. At the center of it all was a man who blended in, a quiet observer. He listened. He took notes. He studied their pain with an almost clinical fascination. Every convulsion, every breathless gasp, it was all part of an experiment, one he had been perfecting for years. His name was Graham Young, and poison was his weapon of choice. This wasn't an act of impulse. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated, precise. He didn't kill out of hatred or revenge. He did it because he wanted to see what would happen. Because he could. By the time the authorities realized the truth, bodies had already been buried, lives already lost. But Graham? He wasn't finished. He had been here before, locked away, studied, dismissed as a danger. And yet, he had walked free. And when they let him go, he did exactly what no one wanted to believe. He killed again. But let's pause for a second. Think about this. How many times have you trusted someone to make you a cup of tea? A friend, a coworker, a family member. You take a sip without a second thought, never questioning what's inside. Now, imagine that trust was the biggest mistake of your life. Because that's exactly how it started. One sip, one victim, then another, and another, until Graham Young had perfected the art of murder right under everyone's nose. Before we continue with this case, take a second to hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And hey, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Graham was born in London in 1947. He took his first breath, unaware of the darkness already waiting for him. Before he could even form a single memory, life had already stolen something precious from him. His mother died when he was just 14 weeks old, tuberculosis taking her away before she had the chance to cradle him, to whisper his name, to make him feel loved. His father, unable to care for a newborn alone, sent him away. Graham was raised by his aunt and uncle, while his sister, Winifred, was taken in by their grandparents. For the first few years of his life, he had no family, no real connection, just the quiet weight of abandonment. By the time he was reunited with his father and his new wife, Molly, something had already shifted inside him. Most children would be overjoyed to have a family again. But Graham? He was different. He didn't care for bedtime stories or toys. He didn't play outside with other kids. Instead, he buried himself in books, not just any kind of book, but dark books. At first, it seemed like harmless curiosity. Some boys collected stamps, some played with trains. Graham collected knowledge about murder. By the age of 10, he wasn't reading fairy tales or adventure stories. He was reading about real-life killers, Victorian poisoners who left their victims writhing in agony. He studied their methods, their motives, their mistakes. But that wasn't enough. He wanted more. His schoolmates saw him as quiet, a bit odd, maybe even intelligent, but they had no idea what was brewing inside his mind. While they were learning multiplication tables, Graham was memorizing chemical compounds. While they were drawing pictures in art class, he was sketching something else, chemical symbols, toxic elements, and deadly concoctions that only he understood. By 13, he wasn't just reading about poison. He was collecting it. Graham's family had no idea what he was up to. How could they? Who suspects a child of murder? He started small. A little chemical here, a little powder there. He slipped toxic substances into food, into drinks. His father, his stepmother, even his sister, they all fell sick, one by one. The symptoms were strange, unexplained. Nausea, vomiting, stomach cramps so intense they thought they were dying. And all the while, Graham watched. Not with fear, not with concern, but with fascination. He took notes, documenting every reaction, every dose, every symptom. He treated his family like an experiment, like they were nothing more than test subjects in his growing obsession. But one incident stood out from the rest. His sister, Winifred, had always trusted him. Despite his odd behavior, he was still her little brother. One evening, he made her a cup of tea. She didn't hesitate. She didn't question. She took a sip. Seconds later, the room began to twist around her. Colors bled together. Her heart pounded violently against her chest. She tried to speak, but her words came out garbled. Terror clawed at her mind as the world melted into a nightmare. She was hallucinating. And Graham? He just watched. Would she survive? Would she collapse right there in front of him? He didn't know, but that was the thrill of it. One sip, one moment. That's all it took. And it was only the beginning. For years, Graham Young had been running his own private experiment, one that left his family weak, sick, and gasping for breath. But in his mind, he was just getting started. He might have continued his deadly experiments for years, if it weren't for one mistake. One tiny oversight. And it came from the very place he least expected, his school. It started with whispers. Teachers had always noticed that Graham was different. He was distant, unnerving, more interested in chemicals than classmates. But no one really questioned it. Until they did. One afternoon, a teacher noticed something strange in his desk. Bottles. Glass vials. Labels with words number 14-year-old should have in his possession: antimony, belladonna, thallium. The teacher felt a chill run down their spine. These weren't harmless science kits. These were deadly poisons. The kind that could kill. The school immediately called the police. But before they arrested him, before they even stepped into his home, there was one final step. The school arranged for a meeting. A psychiatrist sat across from him, eyes scanning the boy who barely flinched under pressure. Most kids would be terrified, stumbling over their words, trying to deny everything. But Graham? He didn't stutter. He didn't panic. He spoke with the cold precision of someone who had already decided who he was. Poison, he explained, wasn't just a tool. It was power. It was control over life and death itself. The psychiatrist leaned back, suddenly aware that the boy in front of him wasn't just fascinated by poisons. He lived for them. The next day, police searched Graham's home. They found more than just chemicals. They found notebooks. Page after page of detailed logs, dates, names, symptoms. Each entry was a confession. Graham was arrested and put on trial. He didn't deny his experiments. In fact, he seemed proud of them. But here's where things took a dark turn. His stepmother, Molly Young, had died after months of agonizing illness. Poison had ravaged her body, yet there was never any proof. The courts had no way of linking her death officially to Graham. So instead, he was convicted for the non-fatal poisonings of his father, sister, and schoolmates. The punishment was a sentence to Broadmoor Hospital for the criminally insane. He was just 14 years old. To the world, it seemed like justice had been served. He was locked away, far from society. But what they didn't know was that Graham's experiments weren't over. At least not yet. Broadmoor was meant to be a place for rehabilitation, a place where the most disturbed minds were kept away from the outside world. But Graham wasn't like the others. He didn't throw fits. He didn't cause fights. He studied, listened, waited, and, just as before, he found a way to continue. The inmates at Broadmoor weren't just criminals. They were his new test subjects. One patient, a fellow inmate, was found dead as a result of cyanide poisoning. Suspicion immediately fell on Graham. He was the only one in Broadmoor who had both the knowledge and the desire to do something like this. But without direct evidence, the incident remained unsolved. But the most confusing part were his words. One day, a Broadmoor nurse overheard him speaking to another inmate. His voice was calm, confident. "When I get out," he said, "I'll kill one person for every year I spent in here." 7 years had passed, and Broadmoor was about to make the biggest mistake in its history. By 1971, Graham had convinced the doctors that he had changed. His reports were glowing. He was a model patient, cooperative, intelligent. His time inside Broadmoor had cured him, they said. One official even went as far as to write, "He is no longer a threat to society." The irony? The ink wasn't even dry on that report before Graham proved them all wrong. The night before his release, a nurse approached him. "You're getting out tomorrow," she said. "Are you excited?" Graham smiled. "Yes," he replied. "But when I leave, people will die." The nurse froze. Had he been joking? Was it just the imagination of a young man who had spent too many years behind locked doors? No one knew. And the next morning, no one questioned it. The doors of Broadmoor opened, and Graham Young walked free. The world had no idea what was coming. But Graham did. He had waited 7 years. And now? It was time to finish what he started. After his release in 1971, Graham was given a fresh start. The government set him up in Hemel Hempstead, a quiet town where no one knew his past. But fresh start wasn't in Graham's vocabulary. Within days of arriving, he sought out what he truly craved: poison. He spent hours in pharmacies, learning which poisons were easiest to obtain. He memorized suppliers, the excuses he could use to purchase chemicals, and how to cover his tracks. Then, he needed a test subject. That didn't take long. At the local hostel where he stayed, he befriended a man, an older gentleman who took a liking to the quiet, intelligent young man with a fascination for chemistry. Days later, the man fell ill. Vomiting, unbearable stomach cramps, a slow, torturous decline. And Graham? He watched, took notes, just as he had done years before with his family. The man barely survived. He never knew that the kind, young man who had once made him tea had also tried to kill him. But Graham wasn't discouraged. This was only the beginning, because soon he would find the perfect hunting ground, a place filled with unsuspecting victims, a place where poisons were freely available, and most terrifying of all, a place that welcomed him in without question. Graham knew that to continue his work, he needed unrestricted access to chemicals. So he did what he always did best. He lied. When he applied for a job at John Hadland Laboratories, a company specializing in optical equipment for the military, he falsified his records. No mention of Broadmoor. No mention of poisoning his family. No mention of the man who had nearly died in the hostel. Instead, he was just a young, intelligent man with a passion for chemistry. And the company welcomed him with open arms. They even placed him in the storeroom where the lab's chemicals were kept. They had no idea what they had just done. Graham had spent years in Broadmoor dreaming of this moment. Now it was real, and he was about to turn his workplace into his personal laboratory of death. At first, it started as a whisper. One worker feeling nauseous, another complaining of headaches, a few odd cases of vomiting, dizziness, weakness. Doctors suspected food poisoning, maybe a seasonal flu. Then, the symptoms got worse. Some lost their hair. Some suffered nerve damage, unable to control their hands. Organs started failing. One by one, employees at John Hadland Laboratories grew weaker. The company tried to explain it. They called it the Bovingdon bug, an office-wide illness with no known cause. But Graham? He knew exactly what it was. It was him. Every morning, he came to work with a plan. He would offer coworkers coffee, tea, snacks, all laced with lethal doses of thallium. And no one suspected him. Why would they? He was just a quiet young chemist. Always watching, always studying, always smiling. And then, the first official murder happened. Bob Eggle was a healthy man in his early 50s. He had worked at John Hadland Laboratories for years. Then, Out of nowhere, he fell sick. His legs ached. His stomach cramped. Days turned into weeks, and his body withered. The symptoms didn't make sense. Doctors were baffled. Then, just as suddenly as it started, he was dead. His official cause of death? Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder. No one questioned it. No one suspected murder. Graham had just killed his first victim since Broadmoor. And if there was one thing he learned from this, he could do it again. And he would. But before that, he had to carry out one last test. Would he feel anything? Would he experience guilt? Would he finally understand remorse? He decided to find out. On the day of Bob Eggles' funeral, Graham arrived dressed in black. He shook hands with Bob's grieving family. He nodded solemnly as coworkers spoke of what a good man Bob had been. And when the casket was lowered into the ground, he stood by, watching, observing, studying. But he felt nothing. No sadness. No guilt. Just curiosity. Bob was gone, and Graham had made it happen. That night, he went home and opened his notebook. One more name. One more successful experiment. And with Bob buried, there was only one thought in Graham's mind. Who's next? The sickness was spreading. More workers at John Hadland Laboratories were falling ill. Some were in pain. Some could barely walk. Some would never recover. And Graham Young? He was keeping count. He had poisoned before. But this was something different. This was a game. One that he was winning. Until the moment he made a mistake. And the wall started closing in. Fred Biggs was 60 years old. A hard-working man who had spent his life providing for his family. One day, he started feeling unwell. At first, it was mild, fatigue, some tingling in his fingers. Then the pain began. His legs burned. His muscles twisted in agony. Doctors thought it was a virus, a passing illness. But it wasn't passing. Fred got worse. His skin became hypersensitive. Every touch felt like fire. He lost control of his limbs. His wife, desperate for answers, sat by his hospital bed, holding his shaking hands. He could barely whisper now. The poison had already done its work. Slowly, mercilessly, Fred Biggs' body shut down. And when he finally died, Graham smiled, because he had done it again. Most killers avoid their victims' families. But this is not the case with Graham. The day after Fred Biggs died, his widow received a phone call. A soft voice on the other end. Mrs. Biggs, I just wanted to say how truly sorry I am about Fred. It's such a terrible loss. He was a good man. It was Graham. He pretended to grieve. He pretended to care. But what he really wanted was to listen, to hear her pain, to feel it. But just like at Bob Eggles' funeral, he felt nothing. Not sadness. Not guilt. Just a strange, twisted satisfaction. Fred Biggs was gone. And Graham Young had made it happen. For months, Graham had poisoned with impunity. No one suspected him. Until Diana Smart. Diana had worked at the lab for years. She was sharp, observant, and she had noticed something strange. Everyone was getting sick. Everyone except Graham Young. It was too much to be a coincidence. Then there was Dr. John Anderson, the factory's medical officer. He had treated the sick employees. He had seen the symptoms firsthand. And one day, in the office cafeteria, he confronted Graham. It's strange, isn't it? He said. People are dropping like flies. But you're perfectly fine. Graham didn't flinch. He simply smirked. I suppose I have a strong immune system. Then he picked up his teacup and took a slow, deliberate sip. Graham had always been meticulous. Every dose, every reaction, every death, all carefully recorded. One evening, a coworker spotted something on his desk. A small, black notebook. Curiosity got the better of them. They opened it. What they saw inside chilled them to the bone. Pages filled with names, dates, symptoms, dosages. And then, next to one name, Diana Smart, was a single line. Dee irritated me today, so I gave her a dose. It wasn't the diary of a scientist. It was the diary of a killer. And suddenly, they knew. This wasn't a mystery illness. It wasn't the Bovingdon bug. It was murder. The discovery of the notebook was the turning point. The management at John Hadland Laboratories contacted the police. They ran a background check on Graham Young, and what they found shocked them. Broadmoor Hospital, poisoning his own family. The warning signs had been there all along, and now they had let a monster loose. When officers arrived at the lab, Graham was calm. Too calm. They searched his locker. Inside, they found bottles of thallium, vials of poison, notes, records of every attack. There was no denying it. They had their man. And this time, he wasn't getting away. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, spectators, the families of the victims, all gathered to witness the trial of the man now known as the Teacup Poisoner. Graham Young entered, dressed sharply, as if he were attending a business meeting rather than facing a murder trial. His expression? Unbothered, almost amused. The judge listed the charges. 2 murders, 2 attempted murders, use of poison with intent to endanger life. The prosecution laid out the evidence. The deaths, the sickened coworkers, the notebook, Graham's personal record of suffering. But what disturbed the jury the most was Graham himself. He listened to the details of his crimes without a flicker of emotion. No remorse, no regret. And when asked about his obsession with poison, he didn't deny it. He embraced it. "I see myself as an artist," he said. "A poisoner is an artist in a way no ordinary murderer can understand." The jury? They understood one thing. This was no ordinary murderer. They deliberated for just a few hours. The verdict was straight to the point. Graham was found guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. And as the judge handed down the ruling, Graham didn't flinch. No pleas, no protests, just the same eerie, satisfied smirk. The trial sent shockwaves through Britain. How had a convicted poisoner who had already been caught before been released so easily? The public demanded answers, and they got them. The system had failed. Doctors had ignored warnings. Authorities had overlooked a confessed killer's past. Because of Graham Young, Britain tightened its poison laws. Chemicals like thallium became harder to obtain. Mental health policies were reformed. Never again, they said, would a man like Graham Young slip through the cracks. But for some, the changes came too late. Because Bob Eggle and Fred Biggs, they never got a second chance. Graham was sent to HM Prison Parkhurst, one of the most secure prisons in Britain. He wasn't like the others. He didn't start fights. He didn't cause riots. He simply observed and waited. They kept him in solitary confinement. Too dangerous, too unpredictable, even among murderers. And yet, rumors spread. Inmates said he talked about poison constantly. Some claimed he was still experimenting, that he had somehow smuggled in chemicals, that he wanted to test a new formula. Then, in 1990, Graham Young was found dead in his cell. Official cause? Heart attack. But some prison officers didn't believe it. A heart attack? At 42? Doesn't make sense. Maybe, one whispered, he poisoned himself. Or maybe, someone else had finally poisoned him. Either way, Graham Young's twisted game was over. But his story? It wasn't forgotten. In 1995, a film was made, The Young Poisoner's Handbook, inspired by his life. Books and documentaries were written to create awareness. To some, he became a legend. To others, a warning. Because Graham wasn't just a killer. He was a reminder that evil doesn't always come with a knife or a gun. Sometimes, it comes in a teacup. So the next time someone hands you a cup of tea, will you drink it? Or will you wonder, who made it? And more importantly, what's inside? Graham wasn't a typical serial killer. There was no blood, no knives, no sudden attacks in the night. His weapon of choice? Chemistry. A silent, patient killer. While most murderers act on impulse, Graham planned his crimes with precision. Every dose, every symptom, every reaction. To him, it wasn't just murder. It was an experiment. He saw himself as a scientist, testing his theories on the people around him. But the most haunting question remains. Could he have been stopped earlier? He showed signs as a child. He was caught as a teenager. And yet, the system let him go. Would Bob Eggle and Fred Biggs still be alive if someone had listened to the warnings? Or was Graham Young always destined to kill again? Now, I want to hear from you. Should someone like Graham Young have ever been released from Broadmoor? His doctors believed he was no longer a threat, but he left prison with a plan to kill. Was it a failure of the system? Or was there no way to change someone like him? What do you think happened in his final moments? The official cause of death was a heart attack, but some believe he poisoned himself. Others think someone finally got revenge. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to know. If you found this case as disturbing as we did, let us know in the comments. And if you love true crime cases like this, hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories out there. Stories of killers who hide in plain sight. Stories of crimes that should never have happened. And trust me, you won't want to miss them.